thank you for joining us today. I know things are a little crazy in the world, but hopefully we can give you some tips and ideas of how to manage some of the uncertainty of leaks and water waste within your facility, and go through some of the things that you guys can work on in the meantime. So thank you for putting in your poll responses. It's interesting. I don't know if we can see the actual results, but these are all items that could be done within a facility to manage water and energy at the same time. So some of them are some good ideas to incorporate. We're going to talk about some of them today, and we also have other webinars in our webinar series planned to go over some of the other aspects as well. So that was just what we talked about. Person, I don't know if you can share the results with me or the group, but that would be helpful to just see how people are managing water.
We can definitely do that.
Okay.
After the presentation today.
Okay. Well, anyway, these are all good ideas to do. So if you haven't considered them, they may be some good options for you. Today we're going to go through a few items. We're going to start with just an introduction to WaterSense and why you should care about water. We're going to talk about some leak and water waste indicators, as well as some ways to meter and track your water use to try to get a handle on what's going on. Then we'll also go over some common water waste that is found in commercial and institutional buildings, so you have some things you can look out for. Then we'll go over some tools and resources that WaterSense has put together to help you do this. And then finally, we're going to go over questions at the end, but if you have them as I'm talking, you can just type them in the chat box and we'll go through them at the end of the presentation. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the WaterSense program was created in 2006 as a voluntary program to help consumers and businesses find simple ways to identify water-efficient products, programs, practices, and homes. The WaterSense label is the one that's on the right-hand side of your screen, and it is found on products that are independently certified for water efficiency and performance. Back in the 90s, when low-flow fixtures came out, they didn't all work very well. So WaterSense has included a performance requirement in every one of our specifications to make sure that you get a product that you can be confident is going to work well and save water. So the WaterSense label can be found on more than 34,000 product models so far. We are also working with Energy Star to develop water factors in some of the Energy Star specifications as well. So when you are looking for a product that's efficient, you can either find the WaterSense or Energy Star label and be confident that it's going to save you water and energy. So WaterSense currently has specifications for flushing urinals, flushometer valve toilets, tank-type toilets, shower heads, laboratory faucets, and then we also have a few outdoor-related products such as irrigation controllers and spray sprinkler bodies that help control the pressure in a sprinkler system. So one thing that I really like to remind people of is that the cost of water is deceptively low. Water costs have always been lower than energy costs, but they're actually coming in pace to start to meet the same amount that energy is. So water is becoming more expensive, water rates are going up, so it is something to really pay attention to. The other thing is that facilities actually pay for water twice, so the costs add up really fast if you're wasting the water. Everyone pays for the water that's supplied coming from your utility, but you also pay a separate charge for the actual discharge to the sewer. And all of these calculations don't usually include the cost of energy that's needed to pump and heat the water within your facility. So when you're looking to find out what the costs or potential savings are from a project, you really need to use the total cost of water, which includes the water and sewer rate and the other fees and associated costs. So another thing with high volume usage, you can also have additional costs due to additional detergent, chemicals, water treatment costs, increases in equipment maintenance because they're being used more often, and then also the cost of actually heating the additional water and pumping it through your facility. So it may not seem like much when you just look at the water rates, but when you look at the whole picture, it is very significant. The other thing that's different about water products is that you have to make sure that you're always verifying that water use is as expected, because continuously running water and leaks really have no added value within your facility if you don't really need to be using all of that. And leaks in continuous running water are often about 6% of water use within a facility, so it is significant. The other issue is that plumbing products usually break down or have physical components that wear down over time, like valves or flappers or gaskets, and those things need to actually be replaced or fixed often. And unfortunately, unlike energy, when there's a problem with the circuit, the energy stops flowing so that you can make sure that it's actually, there's no leaking that's happening or waste that's happening. But unfortunately, water, because it will continue flowing, may actually be just being very inefficient, leaking behind the scenes, may cause property damage even behind the walls. So it's something you need to look at more actively. So we encourage everybody to repair leaks and reduce the amount of continuously flowing water wherever possible so that you can actually get some of those savings. And we're going to talk about more specifics about that in a few minutes. So this is just a little visual that I try to give people as well to kind of just show that if there's a hole in a pipe the size of each one of these little dots here, that's the equivalent of the amount of water that would be lost due to that leak. So a tiny leak will actually add up to about $400 a year. And if there are any large leaks, like the one at the bottom of the chart, that's a really huge amount of water. So it's something that you really do want to pay attention to. It may not seem significant, but it definitely is. So the other thing is that if you have continuously running water within a system or a piece of equipment, the water is flowing continuously, and it does that up really fast. So the one on the right side of the screen is basically just a trickle out of a water hose, and that actually adds up to almost $5,000 a year in water costs. But if you have something that's a full flow in a water hose, like on the right side, that can be almost $30,000 a year. And it's definitely something that could be occurring within your piece of equipment. For example, if there's cooling that's happening, that is something that will add up very quickly. So that's one of the things that we're going to talk about as well. So this is just another chart that kind of shows you the magnitude of some of the different types of leaks that you can see. And even a leaking toilet can add up to almost $2,000 of water costs per year. So it's definitely something significant. And if you have something larger, like a broken distribution line or a stuck float valve on a cooling tower, it can add up really fast. So you want to try to find these things as quickly as you can so that you can nip them and stop them so that you're not wasting a huge amount of water and energy and money. So one thing that there are many different ways to find leaks within a facility, so we're trying to kind of give you all of some of the options that could be happening. And sometimes it's catastrophic or causes property damage like the picture here, but sometimes it doesn't, and that's kind of the problem, is when you don't know that it's happening. Some things that are easy ways to find leaks is looking at your water bills and kind of tracking the water use over time so that you can see if there's a spike. Or you can find problems and malfunctions during a water assessment or when you're doing an inventory of equipment. There's also ways that you can set up alerts from leak detection devices or failure abatement devices, sometimes they're called, and that can actually send you an email or actually, send you a phone call, and that'll tell you when it's happening. So those are really helpful. And then also if somebody's just walking through the facility or someone sees it while they're visiting, those are also ways to find out if there are problems as well. So they're all they can come from lots of different ways and methods. So we're not going to go through the full process of doing a water assessment today. We do that on a separate webinar, but there's just I just wanted to put together something to kind of show you the steps of assessing water use if you haven't done it. So the first thing you need to do is kind of gather your data, and that is something that you can do from getting information from all of the water sources that you have and collecting some of the water bills that you may have within your company or facility. Then you need to also establish a baseline that uses the typical year to calculate kind of a baseline of how much water your facility generally uses, and then you can kind of use that to see if there are differences or spikes in your water use. Then you also need to do an inventory of all of the fixtures and equipment and processes that are using water within your facility, because that'll help you kind of narrow down which ones may be inefficient or need to be repaired. And then once again, you have to verify the performance of them to make sure that they're not leaking or not, using twice as much water as you expect, because sometimes you can't tell. And then you can use that information to identify some specific projects to save water and to actually fix the problems. So we put together just kind of a general slide here to show you the typical water use patterns within some general categories of commercial buildings. Every facility is different, unfortunately, so it really can vary depending on the building use and the building type that you have, the equipment or amenities that are present within a facility, and also the age of the equipment that you have, and the occupancy rates themselves can significantly change water use patterns. So as you can see here, though, there's some themes across the board that you can see. At the bottom in the blue is the restroom water usage, which is pretty standard, around 30 to 40% of water use with almost every building type. So it can be a really good place to target to get water savings. And then also the next one is usually cooling and heating, or HVAC systems, and those are generally about 30% of water use. And then depending on how large your landscaping is outside and whether or not it's irrigated, landscaping can be a significant portion of water use as well. And then with other types of facilities like medical equipment or pools and spas, there's all sorts of other things that could be potential water users and be significant. So we really, because every facility is so different, we encourage people to go through and do a simple water assessment at least, so that you can get a handle on what water is being used where as a starting point. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of information that you need to gather to kind of start the assessment process, but some of it's relatively easy to get, so it shouldn't be too bad. So basically what you're trying to do is identify all of the water sources in your facility and how they're measured. Most people will get a bill from their water utility that basically breaks down the amount of water that's supplied. Some people purchase reclaimed water from their utility, so that's something that's listed on your bill if you're doing that, and that is one potential source as well. And then if you have a well or are using surface water like a lake or a pond, that's another way source that you need to get a handle on. Sometimes you can do that with just getting the information about the pump that's used to pull it out of that source. And then also if you're doing any rainwater collection or doing any recycled water within your facility, those are some other sources that you kind of need to get a handle on and kind of see how much is actually being used there. And you basically want to do that by collecting this data on, usually we recommend about 2 years of water and sewer data. A lot of times people in the facilities management office or department don't get the water bills. It often goes to the accounting department or somewhere in the administration. So if you don't have the water bills and you can't figure out who in your facility is getting them, you can actually just contact the utility and they'll usually be able to provide you with a couple years of data and your previous bills so that you can get a handle on it. And then also, if you have these unmetered sources, you need to look at your pumps and the size of your storage tanks and kind of just estimate how much water is being used. And then once you do get the bills, we really encourage people to make sure that you review them for accuracy. You want to make sure that you're being charged for the correct size meter and that the facility is in the right rate class. Often, commercial and institutional buildings are in their own rate class within your utility, so you want to make sure that you're being charged correctly, obviously. And in most cases, if you find an issue or a problem, you can work with the utility to correct it. They also, you may want to consider hiring a bill review service to kind of audit your bills from previous years. The auditor usually only gets paid a percentage of the overages that are recovered from the utility, so it can be a pretty low-risk investment, and it can be really helpful because not everyone has the time to do that. You also, when you're looking at these bills, you want to make sure you're matching the meters with the locations in your facility and what equipment is actually being fed by that water, so that you can kind of get a handle on which ones are where. And then in some cases, utilities will actually offer credits for water that you can prove isn't going down into the sewer. So sometimes if you have, if you're basically irrigating or having evaporation that's happening instead of the water going down into the sewer, sometimes the utility will be able to give you a reduced sewer charge. Because most of the time it's basically that they just use the number, the amount of gallons supplied, and they use that same number for the amount of gallons being discharged to the sewer, and that's not always the case. And then in some cases, if you do find a leak and can prove that you fixed it, some utilities will actually give you partial credit if you've done this quickly so that you can prove that you fixed it. Because they understand in a lot of cases that accidents or problems happen, but kind of making sure that you're proactive, they sometimes will be able to work with you to give you some sort of credit so that you don't have to pay the massive spike in the water usage charge. So if you have metered and submetered, that's amazing. We encourage people to actually read your meters and really actively manage them, because if you don't, you're just kind of waiting for a gigantic bill in the mail and dealing with it after the fact. So if you can meter all of the sources of water within your facility, you can kind of take a look and see what's happening over time, and that'll help you instead of just waiting. So in some cases, there is one meter for the entire facility, or often sometimes the whole campus of facilities or multiple buildings. So sometimes you need to kind of just separate them out with submeters. So we encourage people to really look at submetering specific end uses so that you can get data on some of the larger pieces of equipment whenever you want it. And one thing that's different in the water utility world is that you don't need to have separate utility accounts for each submeter. They can just be for your own internal usage. So it makes it a little bit easier to do. And then also you may want to consider using temporary flow meters or other water monitoring devices, because you can just kind of snap them on to the pipe run, or you can, use them temporarily and move them around. So that's one way that can kind of help, so you don't have to have multiple flow meters if you don't want to. You can use them in multiple places. And then, as I mentioned before, some of them will allow you to set up alerts so that you can really get that information as quickly as possible and fix it. So generally our rule of thumb that we encourage is that we tell people to submeter any system that uses more than 1,000 gallons per day or 100,000 gallons per year. So some examples, I've kind of put a whole bunch of them up here, but basically anything where you have a tenant space or an individual building that doesn't have its own meter, those might be some good spots for them. And then the really large pieces of equipment like your cooling towers, your boiler systems, your irrigation system, those kinds of things can be really good ways, places to use them as well. And then if you have other, like these other technologies like water features, pools and spas, or some sort of industrial process, those are really helpful to meter as well. And sometimes in terms of tenants can often appreciate when you give them more data on their usage, because a lot of them are now reporting sustainability metrics to their corporate offices. So having that ability to provide that information can be a good selling feature for tenants as well. So lots and lots of new electronic monitoring devices have recently been coming onto the market. There are tons and tons of them now, that some of them you can even use with your phone. And this electronic monitoring can be more precise for sure, but it can definitely cost more. So you kind of need to do a balance between what makes sense for your different facility and your situation. So there are all different types of them right now. They keep making new ones, so we don't have any specific recommendations on specific brands or anything like that. So you really just kind of need to look at the features that are there and decide what amount of data you want. So some examples are you can use a data logger that you can put on a toilet, and it'll count the number of flushes for that toilet, and can provide you real-time data on every toilet in your facility if you want, but that may not necessarily make sense for everyone. Some of them usually they're wireless, and they will provide all sorts of alerts if you want them to. So if you're considering it, you may want to just take a look and see what's out there and see what makes sense for your budget and choose the data that you would need. Portfolio Manager also has the ability to track water within your accounts. So we encourage you guys, if you're not already tracking this, that putting it all in Portfolio Manager together can be really useful because then you have all of the information in one place. So there's a water tab that's right next to the energy one, and you can basically just add a water meter and make sure that, you can include as many water meters as you want to. You just kind of need to make sure that you aren't double counting your data if they feed into each other. So now we're going to just open up a quick poll for you guys to just let us know how many of you are actually tracking your water use within Portfolio Manager. So if you could just take a moment to let us know, pick an option. We're just kind of curious. Okay. Well, thank you guys for answering the poll question. It's really interesting for us to find out how many people are actually doing it now, but also how many people are planning to actually track in Portfolio Manager in the future. And if you need help, you let us know, because we can set you up with some people that may be able to help you get everything set up for you. All right, so the next part that you would need to do to really find all of your leaks and waterways is to do an equipment inventory. And really to do this, you need to kind of tour your facility to find out where water is being used. And we encourage everybody to actually interview some of the personnel, like the maintenance staff and the cleaning staff, to kind of find out, because often they're using the equipment all the time and they can give you quite a few ideas of how to fix it or make it more efficient. So they can be a really great resource. So you really need to go through and capture a bunch of details about the equipment or the fixtures. For example, with toilets, you want to record the flow rate, and often the brand is useful as well. And then you can kind of use that information to try to estimate your daily water use that should be expected for that type of equipment. And then we also encourage people to check any drain lines that may be plumbed to your floor drains, especially in mechanical spaces where, you may not even notice, but it may be something may be draining into the floor drain and you just didn't notice. So it's really helpful to kind of take a look for that as you're going. And then also to locate your water meters so that you can know where they are. And also, this is the step where we encourage people to verify the water use whenever possible, doing it either manually or using one of those temporary flow meters or temporary water meters to check. So these are some ways to collect this information because you want to make sure that you at least know what's in your facility to start with. And then once you have that, you want to basically create a water balance, which is where you look at all of the water use in your facility at the same time, and you kind of try to calculate a typical annual water usage, especially to just kind of see what you expect based on the equipment and the fixtures that you have. So to do this, you take the information that you collected when you were going through looking at your meters and your fixtures and add that in with the unmetered sources so that you can kind of take a look and see what you should expect. So when you add all of these things together, the sum of all of the metered usage, all of your water meters usage, and all of the estimated ones where you don't have a water meter should be about the same thing as about 10%, within 10%, excuse me, of the total annual water use. Otherwise, you could have a huge leak. So it's kind of abstract, but I wanted to give you a sample one so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So for this example, there are about 7 different types of water use within this facility. So you can see here that they lump together all of the restroom fixtures or the sanitary fixtures, and that's the amount of water that those fixtures should be using based on the flow rates and the the gallons per flush of each fixture. And then you can also add in other pieces of equipment like number 6, the cooling tower makeup water. So that's like a large piece of equipment that you really should know how much water is being used from it. So you look at all of this and you add it all up together, and that basically will have about the sum of the accounted for water use, which is what we call it, where you add it up, numbers 1 through 7. And then there basically is another portion they don't have accounted for. So each end use here was estimated and subtracted from the total water usage, and there were 6% of the water use left over. There was about 300,000 gallons that wasn't in the equipment inventory. And that basically is relatively normal because 6% is about what most facilities have. So if it was more than 10% different, then you would basically know that you have a significant leak and that you have no idea where this water use is coming from. So this can be a really good tool to find that potential water waste, and that you can kind of zone in on where it might be. So this is another way to look at it. It's just a pie chart of the same information so that you can see the percentage. A lot of it is coming from the cooling tower makeup water, and there are about 6% that's unaccounted for. So that is the portion that is a potential water waste. So this is one way to do it as well. If you don't have the ability to go through and do a full water audit, sometimes this is like another step so that if you can't meter every single thing or count every single flush of a toilet, you can go through and count the expected amount that's being used and then back out the amount that might be wasted. So we have pulled together some tools to kind of get you started on this because it is kind of complicated and there is a lot of information to manage. So we've put together some leaks checklists to get you started of places to kind of just look and see if there are issues in those areas. We've also created a simple water assessment checklist, which is just something that we put together so you can print it out and take it around with you in the facility and see what things to look for. And then we also have some sample worksheets that can help you organize all the information that we've been talking about, like the list of water meters, your equipment inventory, that kind of stuff. So these can be some good tools to kind of help you get a handle on what's going on. So this is just a picture of the leaks checklist, and it's kind of basic, but it does go through some ideas of places where typical water waste can be found. And then it points you to dig deeper in our best practices to get more information. This is just an example of the simple assessment checklist where you really just can take it out and go around and look and see when you're next to that piece of equipment, what should you be looking for, and how to get more information on how to make it more efficient. So I encourage you guys to check that stuff out, and doing the water assessment is time consuming, but it can be very useful to get a handle on things. There are other ways to do it too, is if you're, you can start doing leak detection as part of your normal procedures, and these are some of the ways to kind of add that in. So reading your meters during off-peak hours can also help to indicate a leak. If there's no one in the building and there still is significant water going through on your meter, then you know there's probably a leak, because if no one's there, they don't really use that, there's no one to use water. Another way to do it is to look at your monthly readings on your meters and look at your water bills and see, what differences are coming up, or you may be able to see a spike in your water usage and know there's an issue. And then also you need to try to keep the seasonal water use in mind, because more water is generally used in the summer for irrigation and often for cooling. So it is something to keep in mind that your winter usage will likely be lower than your summer usage. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then also you can use some leak detection techniques as well. We'll talk about some ways to do to verify water use in restroom fixtures in a moment, but you can use dye tablets or food coloring to check to see if there are leaks in a tank type toilet, for example. Or you can actually, on larger pieces of equipment, install a leak detection or failure abatement device. That's the one that can tell you if there's a spike in use and can alert you that there's a problem. And then sometimes it's just basic, is looking and listening while you walk around the facility. It can be dripping or flowing water in a mechanical space, a discharge to a floor drain, as I mentioned, restroom fixtures that are running, like a running toilet or phantom flush. Lots of people have probably experienced those with the automatic flush toilets. And then also just looking for puddles outside. Seems kind of basic, but that can indicate that there's some water being wasted for sure. So I'm going to get into the common areas where water is wasted in a facility, and this is just a very high-level overview of some of them, but I wanted to kind of give you guys a sense of what is out there. So as we mentioned before, restrooms are about 40% of water use in a facility, so they're always going to be one of the largest portions of water use and a really good place to start. Restroom fixtures are notoriously leaky because of those valves and gaskets and other things. That wear and tear really does affect their performance, unfortunately. Because of this, regular maintenance is vital. You really need to make sure that you're on top of all of the regular maintenance that's prescribed by the manufacturers, and there really isn't a substitute for that. But it is very helpful to regularly inspect any valves or toilet flappers to see if they're worn, so you can replace them. This goes for flushometer valves, toilets, and flush valves, urinals especially. You want to verify your faucet flow rates and check for tampering. Unfortunately, sometimes the users will take the aerators off a faucet because they think it's not working right, and that can actually really impact the water usage significantly. And then for the fixtures that use hot water, you want to make sure that you remove any scale buildup, because it does really affect the performance of the fixture. And if you have any automatic sensors on faucets or toilets, you want to make sure that you calibrate them or adjust them often, because sometimes if they're not calibrated right, they can double flush or have phantom flushes when nobody's there, or the faucets could be running much longer than the manufacturer recommends. So these are some specific things to look at, especially in the restroom area, because they are used all the time. So as I mentioned, there's a couple of low-tech ways to verify water use manually, and I just wanted to go over them for a moment to give you guys some ideas. So with tank-type toilets, like the ones that are in a residential house or a private restroom, one way to look for leaks is to make sure that there isn't water leaking from the flapper, like from the tank into the toilet when it's not supposed to be, when the toilet's not flushing. So you can use dye tablets or food coloring, and you basically just drop it into the tank put the food coloring in the tank and wait 10 minutes. And if there's any dye in the bowl, then you have a leaky toilet flapper. And it can be really significant because it wastes quite a bit of water. And then with the flushometer valve toilets and urinals, you can actually just time the flush to see how long it takes, and that will tell you how much, time is actually, how much is actually being flushed. So if you are using a stopwatch, basically you just it's kind of a rule of thumb that if it's about 3 seconds, then that's 1.28 gallons per flush. 4 seconds is 1.6 gallons per flush, which is the national standard right now. And if it's longer than that, it can be up to 3.5 gallons or more. So just like by doing something like that, it's very simple, but it can be very effective. And then with the faucets and shower heads, you really just want to do a time flow test where you can use a measuring cup or a flow bag like you can see on the right side. They have markings on it to show how many gallons it is. And basically you just have to time how long it takes to reach a certain volume, and that will actually help you figure out if it's flowing at a higher rate than you expect. So I took these tips from a really great guidebook from the South Florida Water Management District, and it goes through every single thing that you can do to check water use in a facility and how to do every step of an audit. So if you are interested, that's a really great resource to use. So the WaterSense program, because we label these fixtures, I just wanted to just go over the flow rates of these so you can see which ones are available. It's basically, WaterSense is basically available for every product type except for public restroom faucets. The national code for public restroom faucets is already very low, so they're very efficient already. So if you have an older fixture that was put in before 2005 or before 1994, then your toilet or faucet could be using 3 to 5 times the amount that a faucet or toilet that you get on the market today is using. So if you have older fixtures, it's a very good idea to try to retrofit or replace them. Some of them are very inexpensive. For example, we have faucet aerators. They're like $5 to $10 and can save you a lot of water. So some of them are relatively easy, and a lot of utilities actually have rebates and incentives or giveaways for these products. So you may want to check with your utility to see if rebates are available in your area. So, and sometimes if you're a larger facility, if you're planning to do a larger scale retrofit project, they sometimes can do custom rebates because you will be saving so much water. So it's something to consider, especially if you are looking at a whole facility as well. And each one of these, again, has a performance criteria in it so that it makes it, when you look for these labeled products, you can be confident that they actually will save water, but they'll also work just as well as the normal ones. The other area to really target within a commercial building or institutional building is the mechanical systems. And sometimes the leak is very small, like the dripping one on the top right side of the screen. Other times it's a huge gushing fountain of water, like the one on the bottom. Either way, the leaks are going to be significant. And then sometimes you don't see them at all, especially in a mechanical system. So that's one of the reasons that we encourage you guys to take a closer look at these things. So as I mentioned, mechanical systems are about 30% of water use within a facility. We recommend people to submeter these and check them for leaks and inefficiencies often, especially if you have hot water or steam that's being used because of the energy component as well. We encourage everyone to minimize single-pass cooling whenever possible. This is because the water basically is run through the system once and then discharged down to the sewer. In many cases, almost every case, the water can be used multiple times before it's actually discharged. So it's one thing to look at replacing or eliminating when possible. The single-pass cooling actually uses about 40 times more water to cool the same heat load as a cooling tower does. So it's something to really look at because the savings could be huge. And so basically we encourage, if you can't switch out to an air-cooled system or to a lower flow system, we encourage people to use the minimum amount of water that's required by the manufacturer for that piece of equipment, because you can get significant savings as well. And then with cooling towers, you really want to maximize what's called your cycles of concentration, and that's the number of times that the water is run through the system before it's discharged to the sewer. And this is something that you need to really look at, submetering or working with your vendors to make sure that they understand that you want to be saving water, and to help you with that process, because there is some calculations involved, and it does require some monitoring for sure. So the other thing to look at is also, because of valves can leak, or because of wear and tear, we encourage people to check your solenoid and shut-off valves often, because if they're not cutting off cleanly or they're not cutting off as expected, it can be a huge amount of water wasted. So those are some things to look for, at least in the mechanical section of your facility. And then also, if you have irrigation outside, I encourage everybody to look at the water waste within your irrigation system, because it can be significant. Sometimes it's a huge amount of water. We call the picture on the right side is what we call a geyser, which is where a broken sprinkler head will actually just have water shooting out of it, and it can be a lot of water. Other times it's something that's just like within a pipe, the joints within a pipe that are, leaking. And sometimes it's below ground if you have the pipes underneath. So it is something to keep an eye on. And that's why we encourage people, if you can submeter it, that's really useful. And then we encourage people, as they're going through to do maintenance, to really just check for these broken heads, broken sprinkler heads, to make sure that you're not watering the pavement. Pavement doesn't grow, so it doesn't need water. And then if there are any pools or puddles that you don't expect, that's something to really look at as well, because it's just wasted water and can affect the plant health. If they are overwatered, they can die as well, so it's something to keep in mind. WaterSense program works with irrigation professionals we have a whole certification program. So there are a whole bunch of professionals out there that can assist you and either designing your system, installing it, or auditing it. So I encourage you to take a look at our certified professionals and, really consider that if you are trying to get a better handle on it. The other thing that I encourage everyone to do is to involve your employees. You can really train your custodial staff and your maintenance staff to know what to look for and to tell you how to report it. We encourage people to put signs in any areas like restrooms or kitchens. Like, this is just an example one we pulled offline to, just show you that you got to just kind of add something there to get people's attention, and then make sure that you include the contact information so that they can tell you when there's a problem. We also have an event that we do every year. This week is actually what we call Fix a Leak Week. We do events across the country with our partners, and they basically do all sorts of events with utilities and local governments. So it's an opportunity to just get people focused on leaks and tell them how to fix them. That's really what it's about. So if you're interested in participating, right now is obviously happening, so next year might be a good idea, but you can also contact your utility to see if they're doing anything, or look on their website and, get on the action. You can also challenge your employees and your tenants to kind of try to get them to help you report leaks and fix them. Energy Star has created all sorts of materials to kind of help with the building competition. So that's one way to kind of engage your employees and get them to pay attention and help you find the problems. There's quite a bit of artwork that's available. We just posted some on the WaterSense website this past week. These are things you can just pull offline and print them out, add your contact information, and post them. So I encourage you guys, if you're interested, to take a look. And if there are other things that you think might be helpful, let us know in the chat function, and we're always looking for suggestions of things that might help. And then also we have resources if you want to have your staff or your visitors take the knowledge home with them and fix leaks at their house. A lot of our campaign is focused on leaks in houses, but you can kind of use the materials with your employees if you want as well. So the WaterSense program has a bunch of resources. We've covered a couple of them already. I'm just going to kind of skip through these slides so that we can get to the question and answer portion. But basically, it's all here on our website. We have our best practices guide, our assessment tools, our checklists and worksheets, and more training webinars as well. So the WaterSense program created what's called WaterSense at Work, and this is our giant best practices guidebook of every single type of water equipment that you could use in your facility. It includes operation and maintenance tips as well as replacement options, and also, helps you calculate the savings that you could get from making those improvements. We also have created a couple of guides for the multifamily audience. So if you are a multifamily building, we have a couple of guidebooks specifically for you and some water assessment worksheets that can help you kind of go through the whole process and manage it. We are in the process of scheduling our next set of webinars. So for now, you can stay tuned for our announcement that'll be coming out soon, or you can look at our previous webinars that we did last year. They're all very useful still, and they're all available on the EnergyStar Training's website. So you can take a look at that and find out a lot more information in more detail. And some things that you can do right now, we talked about a bunch of them, but you can start collecting your water bills, figure out where your meters are. You can identify some areas to submeter or use those flow meters. And then you can start educating your employees to kind of look for those leaks, use some of that, those posters to put up in your facility. You can also use our tools and checklists to start looking for water waste right now if you want, and then start collecting the information and your equipment and appliances so that you can figure out what things to do to improve everything. And then, as I mentioned, rebates and incentives are available from water utilities, energy utilities. So if you're interested in doing a project, you may want to check that out and contact them to see what's available. So for now, I'm going to open things up for questions. So if you guys have them, please type them into the chat box, and I will answer as many of them as I can before we run out of time.